101 review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She's the author of the book Secrets to Parenting Without Giving a F. F, sorry. Giving a F. Oh, sorry for that. And no other than Miss Sue Donnellan.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Book 101, Miss Sue. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Yes, thank you. I am a multi entrepreneur. I am an author, a mother of four, including triplets, and a military wife whose husband has flies a fighter jet and has been to combat 5 times. So multifaceted over here.
Of course. And we salute you for being multifaceted, Miss Sue. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. What does parenting without giving a F actually mean in your book? And is it about apathy, radical prioritization, or rejecting a societal pressure?
It would be probably maybe a little bit of each, but radical prioritization. I think it might be. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. So, what specific frustration or gap in traditional parenting advice compelled you to write this non-conformist playbook?
What compelled me to write the book, you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, as a mom of four and, having triplets, so I had four kids all within a pretty tight age. I found myself, like every parent out there, yelling and being frustrated that kids weren't listening and doing all of the things, grounding, all of the things that parents do to try to get their kids to listen and cooperate. And when I went back to school and learned behavioral sciences and psychology when it comes to children and studied the Montessori methods for children, how to get kids to take accountability and how to get kids to listen. By the time my kids were teenagers, I had a lot to offer. I had been coaching other parents and helping other parents through the tantrums and the whining and the yelling as I learned. And so I felt compelled to write this book, which will help you anywhere from ages 2 to 20 be able to create the relationship of trust with your kids and understand how to show up a little differently to get a different behavior from your kids when you're frustrated with bad behavior.
Misu, how do you define a happy kid within your framework, especially since happiness is not a constant?
Well, that's a great question. A happy child to me is one that has purpose, one that knows where they add value, and that in my parenting style and the way that I teach other parents is to how to build that value into their children. So when you're parenting, how do you structure your home so that the children feel like they add value to the family? And also, a happy child is one that knows what their purpose is. And while that might change from 5 to 10 to 20 years old, a happy child is one that knows what gets them out of bed in the morning, and they're following their passion, their purpose, and they're adding value to the family and to the world and to themselves. So they're not doing what the parents are telling them to do. They're not people pleasing. They're not, they're really kind of connecting to their own confidence and their own self-worth. And that happiness comes from inside and emanates out. And it's a very deliberate form of parenting to be able to instill that in our kids.
Very well said, Miss Sue. Beautifully articulated. Your your title promises no public meltdown. So what's your core strategy for preventing or de-escalating them without punishments or giving in?
Okay, so as far as meltdowns, any kind of tantrums, any type of behavior, a lot of what I teach and coach with parents is that the tantrums and the behavior and the whining that you take care of at home and that we learn how to handle at home productively
Yes.
means a lot less out in public, if at all in public. So when I see a child throwing a tantrum or screaming or yelling or pretty much controlling the parent in public, that's my sense that at home it's not being handled. So I do a lot of coaching in terms of how to handle tantrums and whining and just to create a culture in the home of accountability and not giving into that type of behavior and helping parents understand that it's about accountability and it's about parenting in advance and it's about finding what motivates your child and then structuring in advance how to get that behavior you need from them first before they get the good stuff. So if they want a game or they want to watch a show or they want their treat or ice cream, what do you need done first? So when then? Well, when we get the toys picked up, then we get to go do this. So it's how we structure the home and how we communicate at home to where the child knows that we mean business. And when you structure your expectations up front, you don't need to yell. You don't need to do all of the things, and you don't need to. You can sidestep those power struggles because you're handling things a little bit more upfront with clear expectations.
Clear expectation indeed. Miss Sue, how will you handle if your kids are having tantrum in the public?
Well, what I suggest is if we're having a tantrum in public, that means we haven't parented that at home. And if you find what I teach parents is to look at patterns. So if I would say my child might have one tantrum in public, one tantrum is a pattern. So
Yes.
if I get surprised by one tantrum in public, that means I go back home and then I do a dry run. I do whatever that child is saying they want candy or whatever it is they want. I'm going to restructure. I'm going to do a training run to the store now. Now I'm going to not be in a position where I have to yell and leave my groceries and be reacting. I'm going to parent up front and I'm going to say, okay, this child threw this tantrum. Here's what was going on. How do I reassess that pattern and prevent it from happening again? And that might mean that I set expectations up front and I go on a trial run to the store to tell that child, here's how I expect you to behave. And if you don't behave, we can leave quickly. It's a training mission, really. So as parents, we are trainers and we're teachers, and our children are adults in training. So we have to take time up front to show respect and to set the tone for what our expectations are, and then be clear about sticking to it. So if they're having a tantrum in public, I'm going to sidestep that as quickly as I can in that moment. And then I'm going to go back home and I'm going to train that the next time. I'm going to go on a specific store run specifically to teach my child, here's what I expect, how I expect you to behave. And we're going to build that training in before we go out in public next time.
Very well said, Miss Sue. Empowering answer. How do you fundamentally reframe situation that typically become power struggles like bedtime, screen time, or vegetables so cooperation happiness naturally?
I'm sorry. What's the question? How do I?
Yes, how do you power struggle elimination? How do you fundamentally refrain situation that typically become, power struggles like
Okay.
bedtime, screen time?
Well, there isn't one answer for all of those things, but say, for example, bedtime. I'm going to structure my interaction with the child to where they have choices. They are making decisions up front. And again, I'm very big about having my expectations known up front. So, we're going to have a very clear understanding, say for bedtime. The bedtime routine is this. Sometimes I'll suggest, depending on the age of the child, that the child could draw out their own bedtime routine, right? So sometimes we get them involved in the process. To prevent power struggles at any age with anything. Fundamentally, what I do is I will get the child involved in the process, and I'll get buy-in from them on how this is going to play out. So in the case of bedtime, I might say, okay, let's do a little drawing of what do we do first? We brush our teeth, and then we read a book, and then here's how the bedtime routine goes. And sometimes I get them to draw little pictures, or we'll do um, a little chart where they can cut pictures out of a magazine or whatever it is that gets them involved in the process. And then they get the choices. What book do they want to read? Do they want to not read tonight? Maybe they want to play a game. So I will get them involved in the process. We'll get agreement up front as to how bedtime is going to be. And then I'll ask them, okay, what's next on the list? What's next for bedtime? So getting them involved in the process and getting buy-in up front helps prevent the power struggle, because now I'm not in a position of authority all the time telling you how, when, and why, right? You're involved in the process. We need to get to bed. So let's decide how we're going to get there, and you get some say in that.
Miss Sue, if you remove punishments and traditional consequences, what concrete tools replace them for teaching boundaries and responsibility?
Well, if we're parenting from a position of respect with our kids, taking time for training up front, clearly stating our expectations, and getting our kids buy-in to how things are going to go down, whether it's gaming, whether it's curfew. If we are partnership parenting, which is one of the chapters in my book, if we're creating a relationship with our child on partnership, there is never a need to punish, because punishment teaches nothing. Our job as parents is to be a teacher, and we're training just like we would on the job. And every single day is a new growth experience, a new learning experience for our kids. So if we're doing our job of setting expectations, creating the culture in the home, and creating a collaborative environment as to how we're going to get certain things done, whether it's chores, whether it's curfew time, whether it's gaming time, whatever chores need to be done, all of this is agreed to upfront, and we can structure the communication in such a way to where punishment doesn't really have to take place. Now, consequences is different. I am a proponent of, and I do workshops on logical consequences, to where when we structure in the home, if the child doesn't get the chore done or whatever, how we can structure a consequence that then they lose we agree up front that if the chore doesn't get done, you have an hour less game time, or you're structuring in advance whatever that consequence is going to be, because that mirrors society, right? So our job as parents is to mirror in society how, if you don't do this, then this happens. And that's not a punishment. That's not a go to your room, you're grounded. It's not hitting, it's not yelling. It's simply, I'm sorry you didn't get home on time. Your next curfew is busted back for 2 hours, or whatever the consequence is. There's always a way to reframe the rule that we have, or the requirement that we have for the child. There's always a way to reframe it that sidesteps a punishment and reframes it in a way where they can learn and be taught that when they don't live up to their end of the bargain and they're not showing accountability, that these other things happen.
Miss Sue, as a parenting educator, as an author, what are your short-term and long-term goals?
My long-term my short-term goal is to reach as many parents as I can, through coaching, through my book, through my podcast that I'm starting, to try to teach the foundational framework for parenting. This is all about how to restructure your home and restructure your communication with your child, so that accountability and decision making and responsibility gets baked in up front, where we get our child's buy-in up front. So that's my goal, is to teach any parent willing to listen who's having behavioral issues with their child, that there is an easier way to interact with your child where they take on some responsibility and accountability. It's not just us doing the heavy lifting.
Good luck to your goals, Miss Sue, and looking forward for more and more and more success. And
Thank
what
you.
will be your piece of advice for those parents out there?
Parenting can be a lot more fun than we think. It is exhausting. It's the hardest job that we are not paid for. um, but when you're doing it right, you do go to bed exhausted. But when you're investing emotionally in your child and you're investing in helping them find their purpose and you make them feel like they're a valuable member of the home, it's such a more, partnership, collaborative relationship. And it's a lot easier to parent from that perspective.
A lot easier, for sure. Thank you for your advice, Miss Sue. And what's your specific alternative to be, let's say, saying time out for your kids? How does it differ in philosophy and exo- execution?
Okay, well, I'm not a big fan of timeout per se in terms of making that in terms of saying, timeout. I'm going to tell you what you need to go do.
Yes.
I don't think that that's a great parenting technique because it's not effective. It's not teaching anything. Usually, when we want to do a timeout, it's because we're yelling or we're frustrated the child's not listening. So if a child is throwing a tantrum or they're screaming at home and they're crying and they're whining and I don't want to hear it, I will say, go make yourself happy, go find some quiet time, and when you feel happy, come back and join me and then we can have a decent conversation. I will tell them to take some quiet time to calm themselves down and then they can rejoin, because that puts the control back in their hands. Right, the goal is to make sure that they feel that they're in control. I'm not sending you to your room for a designated amount of time to where I tell you when you can come back. I'm telling you, go take some quiet time, and when you feel ready, now that puts the control back into the child to where they can come back and say, mommy, I feel better now. So time out itself doesn't, me sending a child to their room for any length of time doesn't change the behavior at all. So
Certainly.
that's why I don't use that as a technique. It's not collaborative, it's not training, it's not teaching anything, it's not changing the behavior in any way to where they're learning why whatever it is they're doing isn't working.
What's the most common criticism you receive about this approach, and how do you respond?
The most common what?
Most common criticism.
Oh, criticism. Sometimes parents might think that my accountability methods and the fact that I'm getting collaboration with the child might be permissive parenting. And in fact, that's not the case at all, because I have very specific rules. All of those things are being met. If we need to get out the door on time, I'm about accountability. You're going to leave with no shoes on, right? I'm going to build in the accountability and responsibility factor into my communication. But when I talk about, say, with teenagers collaborating on curfew, me getting buy-in to my child having a say,
Yes.
sometimes people might think that's permissive, because if they're coming from an authoritative or controlling method of parenting, like sometimes that's how we were raised, then they think they need to tell the child exactly what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. But the myth about authoritative parenting is that you're just baking in rebelliousness, right? So whenever you issue a controlling statement, you are welcoming rebellion. And I would much rather not get into a power struggle and be telling my kid, this is what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And then they have the power to say, no, I'm not. Now what position am I in? So while somebody might think that getting collaboration and partnership with my child might be permissive, it's actually nothing close to permissive. It's about accountability, and it's about the child, taking ownership for their behavior. And if they don't take the ownership of their behavior, a natural consequence will follow.
Accountability, people. Accountability. How does parental self care and well-being fit into the secrets to parenting without giving a F model.
So how does self-care for the parent factor in, is what you're asking?
Yes.
And that's a great question because it's very, very important. I talk a lot in the first half of the book about our relationship with ourself, and I'm big about letting go of guilt. A lot of parents really beat themselves up on guilt, and they second guess, and they're going back on what they said, and the children are confused. And self care to me is unapologetically, you know, telling the child, I'm tired, sorry I yelled. It's unapologetically taking time on a date with my husband, or getting a babysitter, or putting myself first and showing my child that I am still important as a mom, and that I need my time away just like they need their time away. If my child wants to be in their room with the door shut, they want their privacy. I also want my privacy. So I'm very big about communicating with the kids what my needs are and how I'm achieving that, however that looks, whether it means, I need to go get a massage, or I need to go to bed early, or whatever. How does my child add value in the home to pick up the pieces for when I'm not there or when I need to take a break? I'm very open about explaining to my kids if I'm stressed or if I'm tired, or what I might need to sort of detach a little bit and kind of get a breather. So I think it's important to communicate that and to be honest with yourself as well as your child, and let them understand that what they learn from you about your self care is something that they will then use for themselves in the future.
Honesty is the best policy, people. And before we wrap up our discussion for today, Miss Sue, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in its fifth season as well. Geography 101 in fourth season, and Law 101 and Mental Health 101, my baby podcast. Love Letters in fourth season, as well as my movie 101 review and music 101. Science 101 and Sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. Misu, for a parent feeling utterly overwhelmed and stuck in the cycle of meltdowns and power struggles, what's the one actionable first step from your book they should take tomorrow?
I would say that when you're feeling overwhelmed, it's we need to be able to look at any behavior from the child that's creating that overwhelm and understand that the myth to parenting, the lie we've been told, is that to change your child's behavior, that we have to change the child. And when I teach some of these fundamental mindsets for parenting about how we need to show up differently ourselves, when we tend to have our lives in chaos and we're overwhelmed, we need to back up our day and step back, zoom out at the big picture, and reframe what patterns are creating our overwhelm, and understand that the power is within us to change how we're viewing the situation, to change the patterns, to interrupt those patterns and show up differently to get a different behavior from our child. We're not changing the child, we're changing our view and how we show up. That's the number one foundational message to parents that are overwhelmed, yelling, not having kids listening, is to understand how to reframe those patterns, interrupt them, and show up differently for our kids to get a different reaction from them.
Miss Sue Donnellan, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And we are hoping for more and more and more parenting books to come. So, Miss Sue, can you please invite our listeners to support your book?
Sure. Yes. You can find me at askmomparenting.com, on Instagram and on Facebook. And my book, Secrets to Parenting Without Giving an F, is also on Amazon.
Yes, people, support Miss Sue Donnellan because if you support her, as I said, more and more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Miss Sue, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Bodycon people, see you soon.